Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 183 of the Baseball Podcast. We got a great show lined up for you guys here today. Another quality show full of great content for everybody listening out there. If you haven't done so already, I'll ask you at the top of the show here to head to the social media pages. Follow us, like, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. I know that's where I listen to my podcast, and based on some of the feedback, where the majority of you guys are listening to the podcast. So if you can, head down there, write us a review, give us 5 stars. We got one new review, which I'll read at the top of the next segment here as we get into the nitty-gritty of today's episode. But as is kind of standard procedure here in the month of April 2020, we'll start with the coronavirus and COVID-19. Well, there haven't been any major updates to talk to you guys about in regards to reports of MLB coming back or what their plan is or what they're, thinking about doing. Last episode, we talked about how it's Arizona, Florida, and now Texas in the mix. Well, that's the latest report or the latest rumors that we've had online. So nothing really new to report in regards to a timeline or a potential location or whatever they're looking at doing here as they're returning to baseball. But what has happened over the past couple of days that's relevant to Major League Baseball is recently, a few fans, more than 5, but they got together and they filed a class action lawsuit against Major League Baseball and all 30 teams. And the lawsuit basically stems around repayment of tickets purchased, while claiming that the defendants, Major League Baseball, are, quote, aware that their representations that the 2020 MLB regular season will be played is false and misleading. Now, Major League Baseball has come out and basically told teams to approach every game that has been missed so far, since we would be, officially here a month into the Major League season at this point, to look at them as rainouts, which means that your ticket could be redeemable at a later time, or you could be reimbursed at the following year for your ticket. And basically, us fans out here, we're no dummies. We know what's going on. We know that even if this year is going to be played, it's most likely not going to be played in major league stadiums, or all 30 major league stadiums, I should say. Fans of the Philadelphia Phillies are pretty much aware that we really won't be attending any baseball games at Citizens Bank Park this summer, and those that have already paid for their season tickets or purchased individual game tickets through vendors such as Ticketmaster or StubHub are suing to essentially get their money back. We don't want vouchers for a later date. We just want our money back. And it's been a little bit of back and forth. Some major league teams have been willing to work with customers in regards to payment of tickets. But the interviews that this article is doing with some of these individuals filed in the lawsuit, basically saying it's just distasteful. Our ticket rep, they sent out an organizational email. They know the rep is not directly responsible, but, they're still asking them for payment of tickets. And I was speaking with a family member who said some college football season tickets, they haven't asked for them to pay for 2020 yet because they know what's going on. And this is not only just a baseball issue. Yes, this lawsuit stems around Major League Baseball, but NBA officials haven't commented when they were reached for comment, the National Hockey League officials, because across all sports, people who have already paid to see events that are no longer going to take place just simply are like, hey, just give me my money back. And Major League Baseball, already losing out on millions and millions of revenue due to ticket sales, are not jumping at the bit here to repay this sort of, this type of money. And, reading this article here, it looks like there's upwards of $1 billion in consumer capital currently being held by franchises. I don't think that's just Major League Baseball. I believe that's across all 4 professional sports leagues. But it just goes to show you the amount of money that is being discussed and being floated back and forth here. And as a fan, essentially, you just got to repay these guys. Any fan who has bought a ticket to a sporting event, a concert, or whatever, you just have to refund this individual for their ticket. And just kind of waiting is just silly because, once again, best case scenario, we've talked about it more than once, is that these games are going to be played in Florida, Arizona, potentially Texas. So any Phillies fan who's paid a dime for tickets this summer, please put in the effort to try to get your money back because, you're not going to be using those tickets. I can tell you that much. But that's really all that's going on in regards to Major League Baseball. Like I said, really no updates and reports. The one other interesting tidbit I did see is that the restart of the Korean Professional Baseball League happened this past week with exhibition games beginning on Tuesday. Now, this kind of gives a little bit of a blueprint for Major League Baseball to work with as they're trying to implement what it would look like to start up baseball. And this is the, quote unquote, third best league of baseball in the world behind Major League Baseball and then the Japanese Professional Baseball League. Well, some of the stipulations they've put in, there will be no spectators, no fans, obviously. Umpires will be wearing masks. Players will have their temperatures taken as they enter the stadiums daily. There's even supposed to be rules that were implemented that forbids licking fingers or spitting, whether it's on the field or in the dugouts. No sunflower seeds are able to be chewed here. So it's an interesting time when it comes to, what baseball is going to look like. But looking further into Korea and what's happened, they've been playing inter-squad games for the past couple of weeks, and now they're starting up the beginning of the actual league. Now, with only 10 teams in the league, it kind of gives a blueprint on what one of the locations for Major League Baseball would be like. We said Arizona, Texas, and Florida, 30 professional teams, meaning that 10 are going to be at each location. Well, if you can replicate what's going on in Korea and they're able to have success, then you kind of say, oh, okay, so how often are the players being tested? How much quarantine, how much individual travel are they able to do in between games? Are they all living in hotels? Are they going to and from the ballpark? And that's it. So, there's a lot to be learned here moving forward. Now, the teams and people, there's going to be less people involved again, but the overlap could be something that Major League Baseball is interested in and is looking at. So, that'll be something to keep an eye on here as we're at the end of April. Obviously, Major League Baseball, they haven't given any implication on when they're returning. Now looking at it, the earliest, again, you expect an announcement to come would be almost 3 to 4 weeks after that announcement. So even early May it happens, you're looking at June or July. That's where I've said all along that I believe the July 4th holiday would almost be best case scenario for Major League Baseball. And if that is indeed the case, that will give us about a month to 6 weeks worth of data, watching Korea kind of navigate through, make any adjustments that may happen. If there were, to be a hiccup or a setback if it comes to coronavirus, if a player tests positive, what does the Korean League do? Are they quarantining them for 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What's the move here? So, a lot of lessons could be learned through the coronavirus, through the Korea professional league and Major League Baseball, but it's just one of those things, and it's a shame because nobody knows any of the answers, and you can only assume that even when you do try to get back to normal, someone or something is going to come up. Things are not going to run smoothly 100% of the time, whether it's the television, whether it's the players, whether it's the health, the family's health, everything that we've discussed in podcasts past, such as, people are expecting babies. Do they leave? And if they leave, they got to come back for a few weeks. Well, Korea once again out in front of this, just due to the health and what they've been able to do over there with the virus is give a little bit of an insight into what potentially we could be looking at here at the end of the summer or even into the fall winter. Once again, they could be playing in warm weather cities in southern states. So it's, we just continue to plug along here, as baseball fans, as members of the baseball media, trying to bring you guys content to talk about. So, that's the latest though. That wraps up the first segment. I'll keep you guys updated on that lawsuit if there is a decision rendered or what ultimately the major league teams decide to do moving forward. But that was really it that jumped out with the coronavirus was, hey, people want their money back. And if I'm a fan who bought tickets, I would too. So we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, a word from one of our sister shows here within the podcast network. But when we come back in the second segment, we'll give you guys an update on the Players League, MLB The Show, what you can expect here moving forward. So hang with us just a second.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate everybody listening here today. It is Monday, April 27th, last week of April here, as we've hit day, 45 of the quarantine, of the stay-at-home order. Hopefully everybody is staying safe, staying healthy out there, doing what they can to help flatten the curve and help our medical professionals on the front line continue to not be overwhelmed. And, just looking at some of the data here, being Northeast, myself from the Northeast, New York being close, they're back to where they were 21 days ago on the curve. I watched the most recent press conference and, 21 days of hell. Governor Cuomo talked about it, and hopefully we can continue that trajectory in a positive manner here. But I teased it in the first segment. I want to read it here. In this segment, we got an additional 5-star review and a 5-star rating. This one comes from Lehigh Alum 11. Shout out to the Lehigh alum. Got to be a buddy of mine. Not sure which one. That's my year. But he rates us, this pod, 5 stars with the title Quality Content. That's very nice of you. This podcast is a great listen. I have recommended it to all my friends. Even though there is no baseball happening, Kevin continues to come up with quality content that is enjoyable to listen to. I look forward to hearing his best MLB team of all time. So, shout out Lehigh Alum 11 for listening here the past couple of weeks, obviously, because they've heard what we're doing coming up here in segments 3 and 4, discussing the best of each division and ultimately deciding which team's the best of all time. I know you guys have some opinions on that, so continue to reach out to myself on Facebook, on Twitter, DM me, message me, do whatever to get your voice heard, and we'll share some of that information here on the podcast. But in this segment, I do want to give an update on the MLB The Players League, the video game tournament that is currently being played across Major League Baseball. And, there's continued, excellence at the top here. Let's see. We got Blake Snell leading the way at 21-4. He takes over the top spot over Joey Gallo, who has held that for quite a few weeks now. He is only 19-4, so it's not like he has fallen off big time, but a different name at the top as I'm running through the top 8 here, and the top 8 players make the postseason or make the next stage of the postseason. Blake Snell, 21-4. Joey Gallo, 19-4. Bo Bichette, 15-5 currently. He's got a few days left of regular season action. Lux for the Dodgers at 16-6. McNeil for the Mets, 15-7. Giolito at 17-9 with the White Sox. Cannell, New York Yankees, 13-7. Man, he's got some games to make up. And then Tatis Jr. at 17-10. Okay, and then Amir Garrett, 17-10 as well, followed by Smith Jr. with Baltimore, 15-9. Happ, 13-9. So there could be some changes coming up here down the stretch, but if you guys don't remember, just to refresh your minds here, the playoffs for this MLB The Show, they will be airing on ESPN. ESPN FS1, they decided to televise this event and the playoffs for this. So the top 8 overall make the playoffs, and the playoffs will currently take place on May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So if you're saying when is that? Well, that is next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So hopefully a week from today, we'll have something to talk about in regards to a champion here. But the quarterfinals will be a best of 3, 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, so on and so forth. Then the next day, moving on to the semifinals, another best of 3. And then the championship series by the top 2 individuals who make it that far. That will eventually be a best of 5. So best of 3, best of 3, best of 5 for the top 8 players making the postseason. Going down the rules here as well. Player League tiebreakers. The tiebreaker, the first one, is the most runs scored. So it's an offensive league when it comes to the Players League. The second tiebreaker is fewest runs allowed. So those pitchers currently playing the game, such as Garrett or Snell, they'll be, happy that's involved. And then if it's still tied after that, Major League Baseball was like, listen, we're out of time. We don't have enough energy to keep doing this, so we're just going to flip a coin. So they got the most runs scored, the fewest runs allowed, and then a coin flip if that is still the case here. And basically looking at it, like I said, there's a difference between, 5 or 10 games left, depending on who you are, to be played over the next couple of days here. So there's really only, about 20 of the 30 guys still around. Locally, Rhys Hoskins in Philadelphia, 10-13. They're eliminated. We got Hunter Pence at 10-13. Matt Carpenter, 10-14. Lance McCullers Jr., 9-13. Stanek down in Miami, 8-15. Edwards Jr., Goodrum for Detroit. Buttrey out in L.A., 6-18. Dahl, who's 6-20. Carlos Santana, 5-18. Mr. Tucker, Cole Tucker at 4-17. And then Rodriguez for Boston at 2-19. Bringing up the bottom of the bracket here. But once again, if you guys haven't watched these or tuned in, you should definitely check it out here. As I scroll kind of down to the schedule, even, Sunday you won't be able to listen. That's at the time we're recording here. But if you're listening to this on Monday, there are a ton of games available tonight at 9 o'clock that you can watch on Twitch. Bo Bichette's playing 3 games. Matt Carpenter's got 4. Carl Edwards Jr.'s playing 5 games. Amir Garrett, he's got 4 games. Joey Gallo, I combined Garrett and Gallo there for Gallet. He's got 2 games. Josh Hader, he's playing. So Rhys Hoskins, basically everybody's in action tonight on the 27th, trying to round out the regular season here, to give a little bit of a breather before we get into postseason play. But these guys continue to be entertaining. They continue to bring smiles and laughter at a point where there's really nothing else to talk about. If one of the guys, Mr. Phillips for Kansas City, he's the guy that has the crazy laugh. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Phillips and his laugh on YouTube. Watch some videos. Man, if you don't laugh at his laugh, there's something wrong with you out there. It's one of those things where it is just hilarious. So there was a point in time where I forget who he was playing. I think it was Smith Jr. from Baltimore, but he almost pitched to Phillips in a key situation and didn't walk him because he thought he was the pitcher. And Phillips was literally playing with himself, and he was like, dude, you thought I was the pitcher, man. And he's like, honestly, yeah, I did. So, they were able to get a laugh back and forth, because then he was like, no, actually, I play professional baseball, and I'm pretty good at it, even though, I may not visually fit the part. It just kind of, the back and forth was a lot of fun. And then Juan Soto for Washington had a few good moments this past week. He ended up hitting a home run with himself. I believe it was a walk-off. So he was going nuts, running around the room. It was fun just to see the excitement for him. A little kid almost coming out there. And Soto's 19, 20 years old, so he kind of still is a kid moving forward. But next time up, they walked him with the game on the line, and he was just as pissed in the video game as he was in real life about not being pitched to and not being, able to help his team win there. So let's see here. We got a few magic numbers coming down the stretch. Bo Bichette's number's 5. Cannell's at 7. Everybody else in the top 8 is 3 or 2. So it really is going to be fun here Monday night to see who sneaks in, as Garrett, Happ, Trevor May, and Smith Jr. could ultimately, come in the back door here and make a playoff appearance. So even if you're not into video games and you don't understand how people could watch people play video games, whoever your team is, whoever you root for, obviously you're going to be interested in watching that player, and engaging with them, because they're interacting with the fans. They're answering questions. You're able to, on Twitch, type in questions or comments. The players are reading them as they go, answering them as they go. So if you want access or availability to these guys, there really isn't a better way to do it on Twitch. And Twitch is one of those up-and-coming applications within the video game world to where, there's only a couple hundred people watching them at a time. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, or 1 million followers on Instagram or whatever it may be. So this is as close and as available as they really become as professional baseball players. But that wraps up this segment, talking MLB The Players League, wrapping up the regular season of the show here today as we've been talking through it for the whole month of April here. Like I said, the playoffs will be May 1st through the 3rd. So on Thursday's episode, we'll talk about who made the playoffs, and then maybe I'll make my picks for you guys, and we'll see if I'm right by Sunday's episode. But we're going to pause here for a word from one of our sponsors as well as one of our sister shows within the GSMC podcast network. I am Kevin Mahalik, your host as always. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
I want to talk to you guys about this amazing product I've been using lately called Hydrant. If you're like me and you want to kick the coffee habit, but you're worried about your energy levels depleting, to avoid the morning sluggishness and that midday slump, you need to make sure you're hydrated. It's super important. And that's where I've been using Hydrant. And for 25% off your first order, you can go to drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC at checkout. Hydrant is basically flavored electrolyte packets you mix directly into your water to make hydrating your body easy and delicious. And what I love about Hydrant, it's backed by research. The formula was developed by Oxford scientists to provide perfectly balanced, efficient hydration. Again, that's drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC for 25% off your first order. Another really cool thing about Hydrant, there's no synthetic colors or artificial sweeteners. The formula is vegan and you can choose between 3 different flavors or a variety pack. So for all my vegan friendly fellows out there, this one's for you. Again, this is drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Once again, welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. We've had a good show so far, talking about the coronavirus, the updates with Major League Baseball. The Korean Professional Baseball League is back in action, and Major League Baseball can learn from some of their rules and regulations that they are implementing. I then gave you guys an update on the MLB Players League, who's going to make the playoffs, what my final predictions are here as they're coming down the stretch for the regular season. Next episode, we'll get into some playoff predictions there. But this is the third segment, the fun segment I know you guys are enjoying listening to, based on some interaction, some feedback that you've been giving myself as we continue to go around the horn here and try to find out who the best team ever in Major League Baseball is. And today's episode, we're doing the American League West. In episodes past, we started out with the East, then went to the Central. Well, today is the AL West. And one thing that stood out before we get into some of the individuals and the teams here is that only 2 teams in this division, well, 3 teams, but I DQ'd one of them because of cheating, the Astros in 2017, won the World Series. Because of Boston and what happened, I DQ'd the 2018 team from this potential exercise. Well, I did the same with the 2017 Houston Astros. I said, you're out. I can't do it. You guys were cheating. I can't put you on the list, even though you were definitely one of the top 3 teams in program history or franchise history. You're unable to make the list. And you know what? Let's jump in there. Let's start out with the Houston Astros, going from top to bottom here from 3 to 1. The number 3 team I had was the 1998 Houston Astros. They had 102 wins and ultimately lost in the American League Divisional Series. So great regular season, but couldn't advance in the playoffs. And then it basically becomes this current version of the Astros. Like I said, 2017 would have been the top version because they were the only one to win the World Series. And if you've been listening for a few weeks, you know you got to win the World Series to be the top team. Even if you win less games than others, you're going to be at the top of this list. But because of the disqualification, that made the 2018 version, the team that won 103 wins, ended up losing in the ALCS to the Boston Red Sox as the second best team in franchise history, and the number 1 team was last year's team, the 2019 version. 107 regular season wins, losing the World Series in 7 games, had a 3-2 advantage until they came home and ultimately losing to the Nationals, but 107 wins, right up there with the most in franchise history, lost the World Series, their best version. 2019 for the Houston Astros. As we continue around here, the LA Angels, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, the Anaheim Angels, the LA Angels that they're currently known as. They've had a bunch of different names. Well, 3 to 1 again for the Angels here. Number 3, I have the 1986 version where they won 92 games in the regular season before ultimately losing in the ALCS. Once again in 2009, lost the ALCS as the most recent team who's on the top 3 list here. They won 97 games that year, had a heck of a season, but 2002, 99 wins. And they won the World Series. So that's the top version of the LA Angels back all the way in 2002. I barely remember some of the people on that team, which we'll get into in much more detail coming up in the next segment as we dive through where I would rank these teams currently in the division. I very much enjoy going through some statistics and some individual players, but as the only World Series champion in Angels history, 2002 is the best version of that ball club. Next up, you got the Oakland Athletics, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I realized the history of the Oakland Athletics, and that's probably going to upset a few of my listeners. This being the Golden State baseball podcast and podcast network, being based out of greater San Francisco or Oakland, the entire Bay Area out there. Myself, again, East Coast, Philadelphia roots. I really didn't know the history of the Oakland A's. They had multiple runs to where they made multiple World Series in a row. Now, you'll hear a couple of those teams pop up here through this conversation. First off, with the third-ranked team of 1974. Now, this is a bit of counterintuitive to what I said in episodes past, where I feel if you repeat as World Series champions, that second team gets a bit of a bump because it's much more difficult to repeat than it is to win the first time. But, truly, I think that 73 version is a bit better when it comes to the A's. And the second best team I have is 1989. So they won 99 games. They won the World Series that year. Once again, 88, 90, went to the World Series, ultimately losing the World Series. I believe 89 was the only year they won out of those 3. But the top team, 1973, they had 94 wins during the regular season and won the World Series. They then came back in 74 with only 90 wins, won the World Series again. So back-to-back champions. But this may be the only team Probably, no, the New York Yankees had to do it in the Boston Red Sox, now that I'm thinking out loud. But all three of these teams win in the World Series. You know, the Houston Astros, all three of them, none of them won the World Series. Well, all three Oakland Athletics versions here were able to ultimately advance and win the ultimate prize. So we're going to dive into that 73 roster in the next segment. And, you know, again, it's a quality ball club out there in Oakland. But I didn't realize the history, you know, again, myself being born in 1989, the same version that number 2 is on here with 99 wins, and that's kind of their latest run to the World Series. I didn't realize the history they had. I knew some of the names, but I don't think as a team I realized the amount of success ultimately they've had in the past. Next up, we got the Seattle Mariners. Third best Seattle Mariners version here during the strike-shortened season of 1995. And I bring that up because they only had 79 wins. They went 79-66, I believe, that year. And it's the least amount of wins I'm going to put on any of these lists. But they lost the ALCS that year. They advanced as far as they have in team history in 1995. So that really makes them the third best version of the Seattle Mariners. The number 2 team was the 2000 version. They had 91 wins, lost the ALCS once again, made some additional moves, put together the top team, the number 1 rated Seattle Mariners team, and that is 2001. 116 wins for that team. And we're going to get to that roster and those individuals. And it's a darn shame that they weren't able to win the World Series that year or even get to the World Series, because I think arguably this is one of the best baseball teams ever put together. But once again, results matter in this business. And I can't put a team up at the top that didn't win the World Series because they weren't even the best team that year. But 116 wins, I believe, is still a Major League Baseball record for most wins in the regular season. And, 100 wins is a heck of a year. And you get up into 116, man, just, oh gosh. And I feel for Mariners fans because, they haven't been close since, coming up on 19 years here. It'll be 20 years soon, until, they've really put something together. They're rebuilding right now in Seattle, so I don't see it happening anytime soon, but very excited next segment to get into some of the detail about that team in 2001. We'll round it out here. The Texas Rangers, the 5th and final team in this division. The Rangers, this is all new. Again, just they don't have a lot of history of success within that franchise. The third best team I have is 2016. Just a few years ago, 95 regular season wins before ultimately bowing out in the first round of the playoffs. They lost the league divisional round that year. Then I have the 2010 version of the Texas Rangers with 90 wins, where they lost in the ALCS, couldn't get over the hump. Come back again with my top version of the Texas Rangers, and that's 2011. 96 wins. Once again, losing in the ALCS. Never won a World Series for the Texas Rangers. And, they've played good baseball recently. All three of these teams are within the last decade. So, it hasn't been all, doom and gloom in Arlington and in Texas, but just unable to get over the hump when it comes to the postseason. And I do believe pitching has been the key culprit there. But the 5 teams we're going to decide from in the next segment, once again, 2011 Texas Rangers, 2001 Seattle Mariners, 1973 Oakland Athletics, 2002 LA Angels, and the 2019 Houston Astros. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Let's pause one more time for a word from one of our sponsors and a word from one of our sister shows. And when we come back in the next segment, I'm going to give you guys the 1 through 5 as we run down some of the individuals on these teams, and some of the names are really going to stand out here. It's a lot of fun. So stick with us here for just a moment. I am Kevin Mahalik, your host. We'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate you guys listening in. It is Monday, April 27th, and this is episode number 183 of the Baseball Podcast. If you guys are enjoying what you're listening to, take a second, scroll down here on your iPhone or wherever you're listening, computer, desktop, Spotify, whatever it may be. Give us a 5-star review. Leave us a rating. I read a rating earlier in the show. That was a tongue twister getting it out there. But if you guys leave a review as well, we'll get you some airtime here on the show to discuss and let your voice be heard. But this is segment number 4. We are currently ranking the best of the best in the American League West. And based on last segment, we discussed how only 2 of these teams have won the World Series, so that then makes the top 2 a little bit easier to rank. And then these bottom 3, unfortunately, it's a shame because I think 2 of the bottom 3 are the 2 best versions of these teams actually on the field, but not getting it done in the postseason. That'll cost you. Starting out here at the bottom, number 5, I have the 2011 Texas Rangers. Let's see, going to their lineup, Mitch Moreland at first base. Ian Kinsler actually had a nice year for them with 32 home runs and 77 RBIs. Adrian Beltre, a Hall of Fame third baseman. He was solid in his year, age 32 season. 32 home runs, 105 RBIs. Josh Hamilton, he was locked in at this current time, 25 and 94. And then the ageless wonder, Nelson Cruz, back on this team. He's still hitting the cover off the baseball almost a decade later. He was able to play right field back at the age of 30 for Texas. Now he's strictly a designated hitter. But Michael Young held that spot for the Rangers, and he had 11 homers, but 106 RBIs. Michael Young hitting .338. Endy Chavez hit .301 that year for him. They had a bench of Mike Napoli, David Murphy, Craig Gentry, Andreas Bianco coming off the bench. It was a nice squad for them. And on the mound, they were led by C.J. Wilson. He went 16-7 with a 2.94 ERA. That's why he ended up getting paid a lot of money by the Angels. Didn't pan out, but, he earned it with years like that. An ERA under 3 in over 220 innings. Not shabby at all. Colby Lewis going 14-10. Derek Holland at 16-5, 3.95 ERA, close to 200 innings. Matt Harrison and Alex Ogando, they were locked in. Neftali Felice was the closer for them that year. So the 2011 Rangers, I just feel for Texas. It seems like they would have a better ball club down there, but really haven't been able to put it all together and win that World Series trophy. Next up in fourth place, very much a surprise. Like I said, I think this team would be first or second if every one of them won the World Series in this division, but that's the 2019 Houston Astros. Last year's version was an excellent ball club. Robinson, Chirinos, Yuli Gurriel, Jose Altuve, he had 31 and 74. Gurriel had 31 and 104. Carlos Correa battling injuries at 21 and 59. Alex Bregman, 41 and 112, hitting 296. MVP runner-up. Michael Brantley had 20 and 90. Josh Reddick had 14. Yordan Alvarez had 27 and 78 in 87 games. So in half a season, had 27 and 78, almost times those by 2. He's at 50 and 150, hitting 313. It's a shame we're not able to see him. And what's currently going on? George Springer, he was there as well. He had 39 and 96, hitting 292 at the top of that lineup. Tyler White coming off the bench. Tony Kemp. Oh man, Max Stassi, just options upon options for this team. And then not to mention who they had on the mound. They had numbers 1 and 2 in the Cy Young race. It's just, wow, man. Justin Verlander, 21 and 6, ultimately winning the award, 2.58 ERA and 223 innings. Garrett Cole, 20 and 5, 2.50 ERA and 212 innings. Not so shabby Wade Miley and Brad Peacock rounding out the rotation. Then on the back end, they had the likes of Ryan Presley setting major league records for most consecutive scoreless appearances in Major League Baseball history. Roberto Ozuna closing out games with a 2.63 ERA over 65 innings. Hector Rendon, Will Harris, just loaded from top to bottom. They added Zach Greinke in the middle of the year. He went 8-1 for them at age 35. Josh James, a flamethrower on the mound. So if they were able to win the World Series, there could definitely be an argument that they were the top team and should be the top team in this division. Ultimately, I think the argument would be the 2019 Astros versus this next ball club, which is the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Once again, 116 wins, a major league record for wins. Let's see, looking at their lineup, John Olenrud at first base had 21 and 95, hit 302. Brett Boone, 37 and 141, hitting 331 for the year. An amazing year for Brett. Carlos Guillen at shortstop, David Bell at third base, Mike Cameron in the outfield. They had Edgar Martinez at DH, hitting 23 and 116, 306 for the year. Mike Cameron at 25 and 110. And let's not forget about Mr. Ichiro Suzuki hitting 350 that year with 56 stolen bases. Just, loaded from top to bottom. Jay Buhner, they had coming off the bench. Mark McLemore as well, hitting 286 that year. And as we transition over to the pitching staff, it is just equally as good, in my opinion. The top led by Freddie Garcia, back early Freddie. He was only 24 at the time. He went 18 and 6 with a 3.05 ERA and 238 innings. Aaron Sell, 15 and 5, a 3.6 ERA, 215 innings. The ageless wonder Jamie Moyer at age 38. He went 20 and 6 with 209 innings. He threw for how many more years? 10 more years after this, obviously with the 2008 fills. But he was at 38 winning 20 games and 200 innings. Just couldn't break a pane of glass. Still winning. Paul Abbott, 17 and 4 and 160 innings. You go to the back end of the bullpen, Jeff Nelson. They had Arthur Rhodes at age 31 with a 1.72 ERA. Sasaki, the closer at the time, 66 innings, 3.24 ERA. Just unbelievable how ultimately they couldn't get it done in the postseason that year. Just looking at who they had. I mean, you look at wins above replacement. Brett Boone, 8.8. Ichiro, 7.7. Mike Cameron, 5.9. Olenrud, 5.2. This team was just loaded with talent, and a shame that they weren't able to put it all together and ultimately raise the trophy. So the bottom three in this division didn't win the World Series. That's why I have them ranked there. These top two did, and that's where really the conversation became between 1 and 2. But we're starting off with the 2002 Anaheim Angels at this point. I keep saying LA Angels because that's what they're known as now, but they were the Anaheim Angels back in 2002. Looking at some of their statistics, Benji Molina behind the dish, Scott Spezio, Adam Kennedy. They were led by David Eckstein. I was going to say Eckerson. Eckstein. Troy Gloss had 30 and 111 in the middle of that lineup. Garrett Anderson had 29 and 123, hitting 306 from left field. Darren Erstad, Brad Fulmer. Oh man. Benji Gill coming off the bench. Orlando Palmeiro. Just a good ball club back in 2002. When you look at the starting rotation, this is where I think they, fall short of the ultimate team in this division, but no slouches themselves. Ramon Ortiz at 15 and 9, 217 innings. Jared Washburn, 18 and 6. 3.15 ERA. Aaron Sell, there he is again at age 32 on this squad. So Aaron made his way around the AL West. Troy Percival was closing. He had a 1.92 ERA. Man, that team is not as good as the Houston Astros or the Seattle Mariners team I just ran through, but they couldn't get it done in the playoffs. This team did. So congratulations to the 0-2 Angels finishing second, and the best team ever in the AL West who has won a World Series, I guess would be the Asterix, is the 1973 Oakland Athletics. I'm going to botch some of these names because, once again, I wasn't around back in the day, but Ray Fosse behind the dish, Gene Tenance, he hit 259 that year with 24 homers, 84 RBIs. Sal Bando, 29 homers, 98 RBIs, hitting 287. Let's see here. Okay, we got Reggie Jackson. I know that one, of course. Reggie had 32 and 117, hitting 293 in his age 27 season. Ted Kubiak coming off the bench. Angel Mangual coming off the bench. Looking at the starting rotation here for the A's in 1973, Ken Holtzman winning 21 games. They had 3 20-game winners this year. Oh God, these innings are just fantastic when you look back at it. 220 for Verlander is a bunch nowadays, but Holtzman at 297, 21 and 13, a 2.97 ERA, 20 and 9 Vita Blue with a 3.28 ERA and 263 innings, and then Catfish Hunter went 21 and 5 in 256 innings for your 3 20-game winners. And then rounding out the bullpen, Raleigh Fingers, 126 innings. That's astronomical for a relief pitcher nowadays. When they get above 70 to 80, people think they've been overworked. And here's Raleigh coming in with a 1.92 ERA in 126 innings. No wonder you ran him out there with a 1.92 ERA. But Darryl Knowles, Horatio Pina, just solid individuals up and down for the Oakland A's of 1973. And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this division. Once again, World Series title putting everybody over the top, but that 2019 Astros team was loaded. The 2001 Mariners team was loaded, but I gotta go with the Oakland Athletics of 1973. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Let's pause right now for another word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows here within the network. When we come back, we're going to discuss the simulation, Stratomatic versus Baseball Reference. Have we had any changes? Stick around to find out.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, this is episode number 183 of the Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that last segment. Very curious to hear your thoughts on the rankings there. I hate the stipulation that you had to win the World Series, but I think it's a fair one. Ultimately, you're not judged on the regular season. You're judged on your performance in the postseason, which led to the 2019 Astros and the 2001 Mariners ultimately finishing third and fourth in this division and not even up for a wild card berth when it comes to the conversation on who's going to make the playoffs here in the upcoming podcast next week. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We talked about that as well as the coronavirus, baseball coming back in Korea. We got a lot to talk about. And now in this segment, this is our simulation segment where we're not talking about the Players League and video games, but we're talking about supercomputers and simulations on ultimately what we're going to see if baseball does indeed return. It's a wild time here in 2020. Obviously, at the end of April, I would very much be wanting to talk about real baseball, injuries, stats, who's performing, who had a great first month. The Astros, Mike Fiers returns to Houston, or Rendon returns to Washington, actual storylines. But instead, I'm talking about video games and simulations. But it's quality content. Hopefully everybody's enjoying themselves listening to the podcast. But let's jump right in. Let's see what Stratomatic and Baseball Reference have now that we're about 30 games in here in regards to the regular season. See if we've been able to stabilize ourselves. Starting out with Stratomatic, the American League East, they have Tampa Bay at the top of the division, followed right behind by the New York Yankees. I agree with both of those. Those are the top two teams. Boston, Baltimore, and Toronto starting to find themselves further and further behind. Baseball Reference, not as kind to the Rays. Right off the top, they have the Yankees very much extending their lead in the division to 5.5 games. So both of them agree that the New York Yankees are going to be good. There's mixed reviews on the Rays, but I tend to think that they're going to be much better than the 13-16 that Baseball Reference currently has them. Transitioning over to the American League Central. Oh, look at that. Stratomatic, the Minnesota Twins got hot. They're now at the top of the division once again, like we predicted at the beginning of the year at 18-11. Followed by the Kansas City Royals and the Cleveland Indians still hanging around. They have the White Sox and the Tigers at the bottom of this division, but Minnesota starting to figure things out. Talking about Baseball Reference now, they actually have the Indians at the top now, 19-11. Chicago right there at 18-11. So Baseball Reference still high on the White Sox and their potential to hang around as we continue to get into the year. But the Twins at 15-14, only 3.5 back. They're within striking distance to get back to the top after a tough start to their campaign. The American League West for Stratomatic, we got Oakland and Houston very much in front by 4 games over Texas, LA, and Seattle. Oakland and Houston are the two top teams in that division as well, so I got no problem with Stratomatic so far, starting to stabilize. Early on, I was like, what's going on here? But again, it's a marathon and not a sprint, and things kind of seem to be working out. Going across here to Baseball Reference, same top two. They got Houston at the top, followed by the Athletics a half a game back. They do have Seattle at 17-13, which I don't know if Seattle's going to win 17 all year. I'm exaggerating there, of course, but I don't think Seattle is going to be very good. And both teams have the Angels at the bottom. I would thought the Angels would improve based on the additions they made, but the supercomputers have spoken. So Houston, Oakland, they're the top two teams out in the West, as we discussed in our preview pod, so no qualms there. Going across to the National League, let's see, they got Washington atop the NL East, trailing by Atlanta, Philadelphia under 500, so Washington and Atlanta, the only two above 500. Baseball Reference has Atlanta pretty much by themselves at the top with everybody else mixed up, and they still have the Phillies at the bottom of the league, only ahead of the Rangers and Tigers and Padres. So no longer the worst of the worst, but still 8 games out and at the bottom of the division. Not a happy camper as a Phillies fan with Baseball Reference. Going to the NL Central, Stratomatic has the Cubbies up to a 4-game lead with St. Louis in second place and everybody else under 500 behind them. And Baseball Reference has my surprise team, the Reds, at the top, with the Cubs actually in the basement. So still mixed reviews on the Cubs and the White Sox. The city of Chicago still on different podiums there when it comes to the computers and what they think ultimately is going to play out. Wrapping up the NL with the NL West. Obviously, we got the Dodgers, Stratomatic at the top, but they have San Diego at 16-11 as a team that could potentially surprise, followed by Arizona at 500, and then Colorado and San Francisco at the bottom of the barrel. Baseball Reference, they got the Dodgers 17-16. A surprise, though, is the Colorado Rockies 16-11. Stratomatic had Colorado at 11-16, so a bit of a disagreement there. They have the Arizona Diamondbacks performing well at 16-12, only a game out. So the Dodgers at the top, the Braves, Yankees, Astros, Athletics, the top of the top, the computers seem to agree upon. It's just a matter of how the rest of the teams ultimately will fill in behind them as we continue forward here during the year-long simulation, or at least until we get actual baseball to discuss. We're going to keep letting you know what the computers think. But let's dive into some individual stats. Top batting average. Okay, we're all the way down to 376. Brett Gardner, he's hitting 376. Candelario for Detroit, 375. Marte, 368. And so on. Charlie Blackmon, 364. So the top hitter in Stratomatic at 376. Let's see where they have him over at Baseball Reference. They still got David Dahl at the top. He's hitting 393, much higher than where they are over there. Jose Peraza hitting 385. Miguel Rojas down in Miami hitting 377. Carlos Santana continues to rake, hitting 372. But all participants now under 400. I talked about for the first couple of weeks how long it was going to take before they bounce back down. Well, now we're seeing it at 393 and 376. It's difficult to stay that high. Let's go to the home run mark. Trevor Story, 13 for Stratomatic. Hiura from Milwaukee at 11. Jimenez for the White Sox with 10. Lindor with 10. Torres for the Yankees with 10. Your top five there for Stratomatic. Talking Baseball Reference now. Let's see where they see everybody. They got Franmil Reyes with 12. Nolan Arenado's gotten hot for the Rockies with 11. Francisco Lindor, both of them seeing him having a heck of a year and a walk year, trying to make a ton of money on the free agency market. That makes a ton of sense. Giancarlo Stanton with 10. Pete Alonso with 10. Marcus Semien, Gallo, Torres, Alvarez with 10. Bregman with 9. So a lot more long balls when it comes to Baseball Reference than Stratomatic. And then the top RBI guy, Stratomatic at 31. They have Nelson Cruz, followed by Lindor and Jimenez. And Baseball Reference, Yordan Alvarez still at the top with 39, followed by Torres, Arenado, Upton, and Bregman, who are in the high 20s. And, you know, it's not an outlandish number. I just told you during last segment, Alvarez had 87 RBIs, I think, in 87 games and was on pace. No, it wasn't maybe 87, but either way, it was on pace for like 150 over the course of what would have been a full season. But rounding out the simulation here, we're going to go to the pitching side of things. Blake Snell, still the top ERA in Stratomatic at .71. Steven Strasburg, not feeling any World Series hangover with a .86. Garrett Cole, same thing at 164. Guzman, he's the first surprise here at 164 with Stratomatic, but only two guys with an ERA under 2. Is interesting. Ian Kennedy at 10 saves. Castillo with 10 saves, leading the way there. Let's see where the top is in strikeouts. If we can get that quick here from Stratomatic. They got a bunch of different statistics. It's hard to kind of find what you're looking for here, but okay. Ks per 9. It's Garrett Cole, Blake Snell, Jake DeGrom, and Patrick Corbin at the top of the list for Stratomatic. And then let's see, Baseball Reference. They have top ERA, or lowest ERA, is Madison Bumgarner, .78. So only one person under 1 here. And again, I don't know if Bumgarner's got that many bullets left. That would be a surprise for myself if we're a month into the year and he's got an ERA under 1. Rick Porcello, he's up next at 137. Walker Buehler, 159. Freddie Peralta, 159. Max Scherzer, 162. A standard cast of names there. Verlander, Bieber, Hudson. atop the league with 5 wins in their opinion. Strikeouts here, Garrett Cole with 60, Verlander with 59. Those were your top 2 last year, so very much the same with Baseball Reference. Scherzer, 59, Lucas Giolito with 56, and then Buehler rounding out the top 5. Buehler with 54. DeGrom, not much further behind that. So the standard cast of characters are kind of coming to the top here when it comes specifically for the teams in the standings, and then a lot of common names in the individual statistics. So I'm having fun follow along. Hopefully you guys are having fun listening along. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I am Kevin Mahalik, your host. Hang with us here as we pause for a word from one of our sister shows, and then when we come back, wrapping up today's episode, we're going to talk about a few ways that the Major League Baseball can learn from the NFL and make the draft actually a lot of fun, even though it's going to be virtual. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 183 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate you guys listening in today, Monday, April 27th. Hopefully you're enjoying the last week of April out there, and the old adage, April showers bring May flowers, is indeed true, and we are headed for better days as a country and as a nation, not only within sports, but just across the board with health and with everything that is happening out there with the quarantine. But as for now, stay home, stay safe. Do whatever you can to thank your medical professionals. Recently I have had a friend who had a father come down with the coronavirus who's currently in a battle for his life. It seems like he's turning the page little by little, day by day, as we continue, our good prayers and good well wishes upon his family and his health. But definitely starting to hit closer to home as each day passes here. So, this is the final segment. This is the fun segment of the podcast here. And what I'm going to talk to you guys about over the next couple of minutes here is this past weekend, if you're a fan of sports and not just baseball, you know, it was the NFL draft. And there were a lot of concerns about the virtual aspect of the draft. Is there going to be internet problems? Are there going to be communication problems? What if somebody loses internet or drops out? Do they just go on auto draft like we do for fantasy football? What exactly takes place here? And really, the draft was excellent. It was entertaining and went off without a hitch. And I got to thinking to myself, well, what can Major League Baseball learn from what the NFL just did? First and foremost, when it comes to the commissioner, this is a big opportunity for Rob Manfred, because before what had happened with the Astros and the Red Sox, if you would have asked who the most hated commissioner in all professional sports is, Gary Bettman in the NHL would have gotten a few votes, but Roger Goodell would have certainly been at the top of the list. And Goodell came off as human, he came off as genuine, he came off as actually a person and not just kind of this figure that everybody wants to look at. By the end of his pick reading, it looked like he was reading us a bedtime story in his basement. So he was one of the big winners of the weekend, and it just got me thinking about how Manfred needs something like this to really restore his image and get back to the way things were before all of this went down. So that was first and foremost, was it's a huge opportunity for Manfred to get in contact with Goodell and learn how to humanize yourself and basically, eliminate that hatred that is brewing. But when it comes to the logistics of the draft, the at-home viewership that we were able to get, you got to lean into it. You got to accept it full throttle. I mean, if you saw some of the setups of these general managers, these owners, these VP of personnel, we were able to kind of get a peek behind the curtain. There were some coaches who have mansions and the visual was stunning. I think of Cliff Kingsbury, who basically looked like he was in a car dealership with the amount of windows that he had. And then you go over to Bruce Arians or Andy Reid or Bill Belichick, who were just sitting at a standard kitchen table. It just really was a nice peek behind the curtain as to, some of these individuals and kind of where they're at home. And I would love to see, Matt Klentak's home setup or John Middleton, the owner, chairman of the Phillies. And the difference between the Oakland A's setup and the New York Yankees, Brian Cashman, what his setup would be, where it would be, who's in the basement, who's got a dozen monitors, who has their kids around them. The kids were heavily involved in the process for the NFL. And once again, it kind of brought a human aspect instead of these guys being robots in draft rooms, war rooms. They were high-fiving their kids after they get the kids, the players that they wanted. It was just kind of nice to see from a professional standpoint and from a team aspect of things. And then, transitioning over to the player side of things, yes, they love walking across the stage, dapping up Roger Goodell, giving him a hug, being in front of all of those individuals. But, I thought it was well done. The National Football League sent a recording kit to the top, I think, 50 prospects. Well, there's no reason that baseball can't do the same. And baseball's draft typically has less kind of fanfare than the NFL just due to the fact that a lot of these guys have to spend time in the minor leagues, and some of them will never even make it to the big leagues. And obviously every first round pick in the NFL you see 3 months later playing on Sunday. Well, we can see some behind the scenes in regards to how these players were raised. I mean, some of the differences between, just off the top of my head, Joe Burrow and his parents' living room in Ohio compared to Tua and what his family was riding in down in Alabama, Hawaii style. It's just, you see kind of who they are as people and the differences that they've had growing up. And it was a nice little show into, kind of a behind the scenes personality check almost. And, it then comes to the dress code. People were loving the Hawaiian shirts from Andy Reid or the robes that were donned at the point of attack. Henry Ruggs in the NFL put on a robe. So, let these baseball guys kind of flaunt their personality. Let them show off a little bit. Some of the picks were still in suits. Others were in shorts and t-shirts. And, it was just kind of fascinating to understand who these people are as people and not just athletes and professional athletes. Now, there are some things you can learn from the NFL. Yeah, Roger Goodell turning around with, visual boos with the people on the screen behind him. That was cheesy, but what are you going to do? I get why they did it. We also don't need a lot of these interviews with, Skype or Zoom for 30 seconds, things like that as well. But a lot of opportunity there, because a lot of people, if you would have asked, would have basically said, hey, this is going to be a huge epic failure. And the NFL had one of the most successful drafts. They had one of the most watched drafts at the time. And think about it. If you're baseball and we're into the month of June and there is still no professional sports being played, people who have never watched the MLB draft in their lives are going to be tuning in this year. I typically watch 10 minutes of the Major League Baseball draft. That's how much, it kind of runs long, and, it's a first round. There's 40 rounds. You can't stick around for all of those rounds. But the fact that there's now going to be 5, maybe 10 rounds is certainly something that would interest me as a fan and kind of diving into. And then just the final thought here, it got me thinking as well. kind of utilizing some of that when we actually do get baseball back on the field. If we can't have fans in the stands, use some of that stuff. Get people live talking to us, get somebody out in the bullpen interviewing these players, or get them an iPad out there so they can communicate with the announcers up top. I basically ask them what they're thinking about now. What do you go through in the third and fourth inning? What are you guys doing? Filling in time in between innings when we would typically have something else entertaining us, and give us access to everybody. Put microphones in the dugout or even in the stands, because rumor has it they're going to be sitting 6 feet apart in the stands. They're not even going to be in the dugout. It's just the opportunity for baseball comes down to access. Everybody's watching The Last Dance right now by Michael Jordan because of the access and the footage it's giving us behind the scenes. Well, let's do that live and, right now for Major League Baseball. Again, because it could be the only option for sports on at the time. And you have to take advantage of this. You have to bring in the national fan and not just the baseball fan. I don't know, maybe bring back Hall of Famers. I saw statistics where there's 81 current living members of the Hall of Fame. Take one of them from each team. Bring them back for the games. Put them next to people, have them interview, even if they are 6 feet apart. Have a Bluetooth earpiece or whatnot. Have them go down to the bullpen during the game. Hey, what are you thinking? I used to do this in the second inning because I'm a Hall of Fame closer. I don't know. There's just a lot of different ways that baseball could take advantage of actually the situation they are put in, such as football did this past weekend, and really put a nice product out there that continues to allow us to see these players on a personal level. The MLB The Show has been a fantastic start, but I think we need to continue this access moving forward if you really, really want to take advantage of the viewership that's going to be available out there. But that wraps up this episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I know I had a lot of fun bringing it to you. I'm going to ask you one more time to head to the social media pages, head to Facebook, head to Twitter, Instagram, follow not only the Baseball Podcast, but all the other shows that the GSMC Podcast Network has out there, whether it's news, movies, music, pets, whatever you're into. GSMC has a podcast and a social media page that will be right for you. And then lastly, if you haven't done so already, we're up to 12 reviews on Apple Podcast. I've had 4 written reviews that I've shared here. Do that, man. Leave a 5-star review. Write us a review. I'll read it here on the podcast for you. We'll get you some airtime. I thank you guys for listening out there. As always, I appreciate it very, very much. Share the pod with your family, your friends. Continue to help us spread the word. But I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. That wraps it up for episode number 183. We'll see you guys on Thursday, talking more baseball.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.